The deep woods hummed with an unfamiliar tension, a silence too profound to be natural, broken only by the whisper of ancient pines. It wasn't the usual symphony of crickets and rustling leaves, but something far more primal, a low, resonant thrum that seemed to vibrate through the very earth itself. Then came the sound, a guttural, drawn-out cry that cut through the oppressive stillness, echoing off the distant peaks of the Pacific Northwest. It was unlike any animal call Elias had ever heard, a sound that spoke of immense power and something ancient, something that had dwelled in these forests long before humans dared to trespass. A shiver, not entirely of cold, traced its way down his spine. Elias was a man carved from the very wilderness he inhabited. His cabin, a weathered testament to solitude, stood nestled deep within a forgotten pocket of the Olympic National Forest, miles from the nearest semblance of civilization. He sought this isolation, not just for the quiet, but for the untamed beauty that fueled his passion: wilderness photography. Yet beneath the lens there pulsed another, more clandestine obsession. Elias was an amateur cryptozoologist, a seeker of the hidden, the unexplained, the mythical. Bigfoot, Sasquatch, the elusive forest giant. These were not mere campfire tales to him, but the very purpose of his solitary existence. He meticulously documented every strange track, every snapped branch, every unexplained shadow, driven by a relentless desire to prove what the mainstream scoffed at. His pursuit wasn't born of mere scientific curiosity alone. It was rooted in a deeper, more profound sorrow. Years ago, the unforgiving trails of these very mountains had claimed his wife and daughter in a sudden, brutal hiking accident. The wilderness, once their shared sanctuary, had become a tomb. And in its vast, indifferent expanse, Elias found a new kind of purpose. He believed his lost family would want him to understand the wild completely, to confront its deepest mysteries. This quest for cryptids, particularly the legendary Sasquatch, had become his penance, his obsession, and perhaps his only tether to a world that had once held joy. He poured all his grief, all his unwavering focus, into the hunt for the unknown, convinced that if he could just understand this one impossible thing, he might find some semblance of peace, some order in the chaos of his loss. One crisp autumn morning, the peculiar sounds from the previous night returned, closer this time. A series of deep, rhythmic thumps vibrated from the tree line just beyond his worn porch. Elias, coffee forgotten, grabbed his binoculars, his heart a frantic drum against his ribs. Through the dense foliage, he caught no glimpse, only the swaying tops of firs, as if some immense force had brushed past them. He waited, breath held, but the forest fell silent once more. After a tense hour, unable to shake the feeling of being watched, Elias cautiously ventured out, his trusty camera slung over his shoulder, always ready. He didn't have to go far. Just 100 yards from his cabin, where the deer usually grazed, the ground told an unbelievable story. There, pressed into the soft, damp earth, were footprints. Gigantic. Far, far larger than any bear print he'd ever encountered, easily twice the size of his own hiking boot, and unmistakably bipedal. The detail was incredible, showing 5 distinct toes and a telltale mid-foot bulge that cryptozoologists so often debated. His breath hitched. This wasn't merely a large animal, this was something else. His scientific mind, usually so disciplined, reeled, trying to rationalize it with known fauna, but there was no rationalization. These prints were proof, undeniable and terrifying. A profound sense of both fear and exhilaration washed over him. The primal chill of the unknown, warred with the electrifying thrill of discovery. This was it. This was what he had dedicated his life to finding. His heart pounded with a mix of dread and scientific curiosity, a potent cocktail of emotions that both terrified and invigorated him. The creature was real, and it was close. Perhaps it had always been close, watching his solitary existence, observing his endless, fruitless searches. The thought sent another shiver down his spine, but this time it was laced with a strange sense of vindication. His obsession wasn't folly, it was prophecy. He knelt, pulling out his measuring tape and a small notebook, his hands trembling slightly as he meticulously documented every angle, every impression. The air itself seemed charged with a palpable energy, as if the forest held its breath, awaiting his next move. He knew, with absolute certainty, that this was just the beginning. The low, guttural calls, the immense footprints, they were not mere anomalies, but invitations. Invitations to a world beyond human comprehension, a world he was now irrevocably drawn into, a world that held secrets that could redefine humanity itself. His camera clicked, capturing the impossible, and with each snap, Elias felt himself moving closer to a revelation that promised to shake the very foundations of his solitary world. If you're as enthralled by the mysteries of the wild as Elias is, and you want to follow his incredible journey into the heart of the Sasquatch enigma, then you absolutely need to subscribe right now. Don't miss a single step of this mind-bending adventure. Hit that notification bell so you're always the first to know when a new part of this thrilling saga drops. Believe me, what Elias is about to uncover is something that should have remained buried, and you won't want to miss a single disturbing revelation. This is just the beginning, and the forest hides far more than just ancient trees. The shadowy presence around Elias's secluded cabin grew bolder, more insistent with each passing night. What began as fleeting glimpses and unusual tracks had escalated into a persistent, unsettling surveillance. He would wake to find branches snapped with unnatural force, perfectly aligned saplings twisted and broken, like grotesque sculptures near his porch, signs of territorial markings that spoke of immense power and deliberate intent. A trail camera, painstakingly hidden in a thicket he considered impenetrable, was discovered smashed into splinters, its memory card missing. This wasn't merely a large animal passing through. This was a calculated, intelligent being, actively asserting its dominance, its invisible perimeter tightening around his small clearing. Elias felt the weight of unseen eyes upon him constantly. The rustle of leaves, once a comforting lullaby of the forest, now sent shivers down his spine. The creak of the old cabin became amplified, every shadow a potential hiding place for the elusive entity. He started checking his locks multiple times before bed, a habit he hadn't needed in years of wilderness solitude. His once peaceful sanctuary had transformed into a cage, the bars forged from his own growing paranoia. Yet within this fear, a fierce determination burned. This creature, this Bigfoot, was no mere myth. Its actions were too deliberate, too impactful to be anything but real. And if it was real, it could be documented. It had to be documented. He recognized the pattern. These were warnings. But warnings against what? His presence? His photographic intrusions? The more aggressive the creature became, the more Elias's scientific curiosity intertwined with a primal, almost competitive drive. He was an observer, yes, but he was also encroaching. The antagonist, as he now thought of it, was not inherently malicious, but fiercely protective, a guardian of its domain. The primary obstacle wasn't the creature's physical strength, but its profound intelligence, its uncanny ability to anticipate his moves, to remain a ghost just beyond the veil of perception. Elias began to strategize. He upgraded his camera traps, investing in military-grade motion sensors and infrared technology, embedding them deep within tree trunks, camouflaging them with incredible precision. He left out offerings, mimicking indigenous practices he'd read about, piles of berries and smoked salmon, carefully placed at the edge of his property. He even tried to mimic the guttural, haunting calls he'd sometimes heard echoing through the valley, hoping to establish some form of communication, a tentative bridge between their two worlds. He spent hours practicing, his own voice cracking with strain, trying to replicate the resonant depth of those primeval sounds. Each attempt was met with elegant, frustrating failure. The camera traps would often be found disarmed, sometimes delicately so, as if by a surgeon, other times contemptuously tossed aside. The food offerings would disappear, but never a single footprint would be left behind. The mimicking calls would be met with an eerie silence, a profound stillness that felt heavier than any roar, as if the forest itself held its breath, mocking his efforts. Elias, a man who prided himself on his meticulous observation and logical deduction, was consistently outmaneuvered, his sophisticated equipment rendered useless by a creature that seemingly defied every known law of the natural world. The frustration gnawed at him, eroding his patience and amplifying his isolation. He stopped venturing into town, fearing that even a brief absence would lead to further territorial incursions, or worse, the creature moving on entirely. His cabin, once a place of quiet contemplation, became a laboratory of obsession, cluttered with maps, plaster casts of elusive tracks, and failed camera footage. He scribbled notes incessantly, logging every broken branch, every strange silence, every feeling of being watched, trying to discern a pattern, a weakness, an opening. One night, a particularly aggressive display left him shaken to his core. He had been working late, editing some landscape photos, when a deafening crash erupted from the forest behind his cabin. Rushing out, rifle in hand, he found a massive Douglas fir, perhaps 3 feet in diameter, snapped cleanly in half, its mighty trunk splintered as if by a giant's hand. There were no saw marks, no axe wounds, just raw, brutal force. And etched into the shattered wood, almost mocking him, was a series of deep gouges, too regular, too intentional to be claw marks. They formed a crude, unmistakable symbol, 3 parallel lines intersected by a shorter horizontal one. It was a warning, stark and unequivocal, placed directly in his line of sight. Elias stood there, moonlight filtering through the broken canopy, his breath fogging in the cold night air. The sheer power required to fell such a tree, coupled with the deliberate marking, sent a chill of profound respect and genuine terror through him. This was not an animal to be simply photographed and catalogued. This was an intelligent, formidable rival, staking its claim. His isolation deepened into a pervasive sense of being truly alone in the face of an ancient, mysterious force that he was only just beginning to comprehend. But even as fear whispered caution, the thrill of the chase, the lure of the unknown, pulled him deeper into the wilderness, toward the truth he was so desperate to uncover. He knew, with a certainty that resonated through his very bones, that he was getting closer, even as the creature pushed him to his limits. The game, he realized, had only just begun. The whispers from the woods evolved, no longer distant echoes but insistent demands on Elias's perception. The subtle shifts in the forest became glaring signs, impossible to ignore. His camera traps, once his pride and joy, became mere toys in a game he hadn't fully understood. He found them either disabled with surprising precision, their lenses inexplicably obscured by moss or mud, or reoriented to point at nothing in particular, as if mocking his attempts to capture an elusive truth. Yet, a new, unsettling pattern emerged from these interactions. Not only did the creature continue to outsmart his technology, it began leaving behind peculiar messages. The first was a series of small, primitive stick figures, carefully arranged on a flat rock near one of his disarmed cameras. They weren't broken branches carelessly discarded. These were deliberately fashioned. Two larger figures standing over a smaller one, a silent tableau. Elias, with his scientific mind constantly seeking empirical data, initially dismissed them as coincidence, perhaps the work of a clever raccoon or even a curious bear. But then he found others, elaborate rock cairns built with an obvious intent, stones balanced precariously yet perfectly, forming rudimentary arches and towers that no natural force could have created. These structures seemed to appear overnight, always near another tampered camera, or close to a spot where he'd left a food offering, untouched. His initial frustration at being outmaneuvered gradually gave way to a chilling realization. This was not a mere animal. These formations weren't random. They suggested an intelligence, a deliberate, even artistic intent, far beyond the capabilities of any known forest dweller. The creature wasn't just avoiding his gaze. It was communicating, albeit in a language he couldn't yet decipher. He felt an icy thrill intertwine with his persistent scientific hunger. This was something truly extraordinary, something that defied every zoological textbook he had ever read. Then came the artifacts. He started noticing them after a particularly complex rock arrangement appeared near his cabin's perimeter. Digging cautiously around the base of one of the rock pillars, he unearthed a small, flat stone, smoothed and polished on one side, with faint, almost imperceptible etchings. It felt ancient, its surface cool and silent against his palm. Days later, near another stick figure formation, he discovered a shard of what looked like obsidian, expertly flaked to form a sharp edge, clearly a tool, yet unlike any he had seen from local indigenous cultures. These weren't just random stones. They carried the weight of history, of a hidden past stirring beneath the forest floor. He began to believe that the creature was not only intelligent, but also possessed a culture, an ancestry. His cabin, once a sanctuary, now felt like a research outpost under constant observation. The forest, once a comfort, now held a profound, watchful presence. Elias was losing sleep, his days consumed by scrutinizing every rustle, every shadow, driven by a gnawing compulsion to understand. The line between fear and fascination blurred, each discovery pulling him deeper into an unknown world. The turning point arrived with the ferocity of a sudden, unannounced predator. A violent, unseasonal storm descended upon the Pacific Northwest, unleashing torrential rain and winds that howled through the forest like a banshee. Trees swayed precariously, branches snapped with alarming cracks, and the familiar landscape transformed into a watery, dangerous chaos. Elias knew it was too risky to remain in his cabin, vulnerable to falling timber. His only recourse was a place he had explored years ago, a relic of a bygone era, an old, abandoned mine shaft. He remembered its entrance, a gaping maw in the side of a rocky outcrop, offering a more stable refuge from the tempest's fury. Battling against the driving rain, blinded by flashes of lightning, Elias stumbled towards the mine entrance. The ground was slick with mud, and the air throbbed with the storm's raw power. As he neared the gaping orifice, a fresh wave of primal fear washed over him. Not from the storm, but from something far more immediate. Etched into the soft mud, leading directly into the mine shaft, were colossal footprints. They were unmistakable, massive and deep, far larger than any bear, certainly not human. They were the prints he had been tracking for weeks, now leading into the dark maw of the earth, defying common animal behavior. Animals sought shelter from storms, but rarely in such a direct, singular path into a subterranean blackness. His heart pounded against his ribs, a frantic drumbeat of terror and exhilaration. The creature, the Bigfoot, was in there. It had sought refuge in the same place he was heading. Every instinct screamed at him to turn back, to brave the storm rather than whatever lay ahead. But the intellectual curiosity, the scientific imperative that had consumed him for so long, overrode the fear. This was his chance, his one opportunity to confront the mystery that had reshaped his life. With a deep, shuddering breath, he followed the tracks, the beam of his headlamp cutting a meager path into the oppressive darkness. The air inside the mine was heavy, smelling of damp earth and ancient minerals. Water dripped from the ceiling, echoing eerily in the vastness. Elias moved cautiously, his senses hyper-alert, each step resonating unnervingly. The footprints continued, leading deeper, further away from the storm raging outside. The silence was profound, broken only by his own heavy breathing and the distant pitter-patter of unseen water. Then, from the absolute blackness ahead, it began. A low, guttural growl. Not a single sound, but a series of resonant vibrations that seemed to emanate from the very rock itself. It was distinctly non-human, powerful and raw, laced with an undercurrent of something mournful, almost sorrowful. The sound expanded, filling the shafts, bouncing off the damp walls, a primal lament that raised the hairs on Elias's neck. Another sound followed, a low moan that seemed to carry the weight of ages, echoing from somewhere deeper within the mine's forgotten depths. Elias froze, his blood running cold. His rational mind struggled to process what he was hearing. His instinct screamed danger. The growls and moans were not aggressive, not a challenge, but something far more unsettling. A sound of profound emotion, of ancient suffering. A terrible sense of dread coiled in his stomach, yet he couldn't retreat. The compulsion to investigate, to understand the source of these haunting sounds was irresistible. He gripped his camera tightly, its cold metal a small comfort, and took another trembling step forward into the echoing darkness, pulled by an unyielding force towards the heart of the mine's secret. The low moans and guttural growls resonated through the mine, a haunting symphony that pulled Elias deeper into its ancient embrace. Each wavering echo seemed to beckon, promising answers to questions he hadn't even fully formed. He moved with a hyper-focused caution, his headlamp swinging slightly, painting fleeting images on the rough-hewn walls. The air grew heavier, cooler, carrying with it a distinct, earthy scent that was not unpleasant, but deeply primordial. The massive footprints he had followed from the storm-swept entrance were now less distinct, having traversed drier, rockier sections, but the palpable presence of whatever made them remained a heavy shroud in the darkness. Suddenly, the path narrowed, forcing him to squeeze through a jagged fissure in the rock. On the other side, the tunnel opened into an enormous cavern, a space so vast his headlamp beams struggled to reach its limits. It was unlike anything he had ever seen in the countless mines he had explored. The walls, ceiling, and even parts of the floor glowed with an ethereal, soft green luminescence. It pulsed gently, an otherworldly light emanating from what appeared to be a thick carpet of phosphorescent moss, bathing the entire chamber in an eerie, dreamlike glow. This was no natural formation. The moss seemed to cling only to meticulously carved surfaces. As Elias's eyes adjusted to the dim, pervasive light, the true scale and nature of the chamber began to reveal itself. This was not merely a cavern, but a vast, hidden sanctuary, painstakingly sculpted from the very heart of the mountain. Crude but deliberate chisel marks scarred the rock, shaping alcoves and rudimentary platforms. On one wall, a series of ancient, almost geometric carvings depicted figures that were undeniably humanoid, yet elongated, with heavy brows and powerfully built frames, their forms intertwining with symbols that vaguely resembled constellations, or perhaps an archaic script. This was a place of immense age, a sanctuary fashioned by hands long since turned to dust, a secret buried deep beneath the earth. Drawn by an irresistible force, Elias ventured further into the chamber. In its very center, beneath a natural skylight formed by a collapsed section of the mine shaft above, now covered by thick, translucent mineral deposits that filtered a faint, ghostly illumination from the distant storm clouds, lay something that stopped his breath cold. It was a collection of bones, arranged almost ceremonially on a raised, flat stone slab. At first glance, he thought they were animal, perhaps large primate bones, but as he cautiously approached, the unmistakable morphology of hominid remains became terrifyingly clear. These were not human bones as he knew them. The skull was massive, with a pronounced sagittal crest and deeply set orbital ridges, but the overall structure was undeniably bipedal, the hip bones broad and pelvic, the leg bones impressively long and thick-walled. The ribs were like bowed tree branches, suggesting a chest cavity of immense proportions. The hand bones, spread out on the slab, implied digits of incredible strength and dexterity. This skeleton, though partial, spoke of an individual that stood easily over 9 feet tall, possessing a raw power far exceeding any modern human. A jolt of primal dread mixed with dizzying awe shot through Elias. Gigantopithecus, his mind whispered. But no, this was too refined, too articulate in its skeletal structure, too clearly bipedal. This was something else entirely. These bones were not those of an ape, but of something disturbingly human-like, yet grotesquely magnified, a missing link that shattered every established paradigm of human evolution. Mixed among the bones were rudimentary tools, polished obsidian blades far larger than any he'd ever seen, hafted onto heavy fossilized wood, and strange, hollowed-out gourds adorned with intricate patterns, suggesting a level of craftsmanship and symbolic thought. There were also smooth, river-worn stones, some with holes bored through them, perhaps ancient ornaments or talismans. This was not a kill site. It was a burial, a sacred resting place. The implications crashed down on Elias, a tidal wave of impossible truth. His scientific mind, honed by years of rigorous inquiry, reeled. Every textbook, every theory, every accepted timeline of human development was rendered instantly obsolete by the silent testimony of these bones. This wasn't just a cryptid, a myth made flesh. This was evidence of an ancient, intelligent species, a civilization that had carved its existence into the very bedrock of the world, long before modern humanity had even begun to crawl from the swamps. He ran a trembling hand over one of the colossal femurs, the bone cool and smooth beneath his fingertips, feeling the weight of millennia. Dread settled in his stomach like a cold stone. This was not merely a scientific discovery, it was a profound existential shock. The very fabric of his understanding of the world was unraveling. The creature he had been tracking, the elusive Bigfoot, was not just an animal Not just some primitive ape man, it was a descendant, a living relic of this forgotten lineage, probably the last remnant of a monumental civilization. The initial terror he had felt, the pure, unadulterated fear of the unknown, began to transmute into something far more complex, a terrifying realization of the sheer magnitude of what lay before him. He was a lone man, standing in a hidden chamber, illuminated by phosphorescent moss, gazing upon the colossal remains of a species that should not, could not exist according to all conventional wisdom. The weight of this secret, the immensity of this truth, pressed down on him, threatening to crush his sanity. His heart pounded not from fear of immediate danger, but from the overwhelming, dizzying awe of a paradigm shattered, of history rewritten in bone and ancient stone. The mournful sounds he had heard earlier now seemed to make a terrible, sorrowful sense. This was not just a hiding place, but a tomb, a monumental testament to a lost people, patiently awaiting rediscovery by an unsuspecting world, or perhaps forever to remain untouched. Elias felt a profound sense of privilege, mixed with an almost unbearable burden of responsibility. What he had found here in the echoing darkness of the forgotten mine should have, perhaps, remained buried forever. The oppressive darkness, thick with the scent of damp earth and forgotten time, gradually receded as Elias ventured deeper into the mine's hidden chamber. The phosphorescent moss, a soft, ethereal green, painted the vast cavern with an unearthly glow, revealing ancient, crude carvings etched into the stone walls. His breath hitched as his headlamp illuminated the center of the chamber, where the first revelation had taken root. There lay a collection of bones, not those of any animal he recognized, but disturbingly human-like in their structure, yet far larger, more robust, almost giant. His scientific mind reeled, grappling with the sheer impossibility of what lay before him. Scattered amongst these colossal remains were rudimentary tools, chipped obsidian blades, and ornaments carved from bone and stone, hinting at a past civilization completely unknown to recorded history. Elias knelt, his fingers trembling, as he carefully examined a femur almost as long as his own leg, the bone dense and heavy. The implications were staggering, shattering every preconceived notion he held about human origins and evolution. His emotional state was a tempest of awe, dread, and a terrifying realization of the unknown. This wasn't just a new species. This was a forgotten lineage, a silent, monumental secret buried beneath layers of earth and time. As he carefully documented the findings with his camera, the air around him shifted, growing heavy, charged with an unseen presence. A subtle rustle, a displacement of the ancient dust that had lain undisturbed for millennia, caused him to slowly turn, his heart hammering against his ribs. From the deeper recesses of the chamber, where the phosphorescent glow barely reached, a massive, shadowy figure emerged. It was the Bigfoot. Not a blurred image on a trail cam, not a fleeting glimpse in the woods, but a living, breathing, colossal presence. It stood silently, observing Elias with an intensity that transcended mere animal curiosity. Its eyes, deep-set and dark, held a surprising intelligence, a profound sadness that seemed to mirror the ancient sorrow of the chamber itself. In one of its massive hands, it carried an additional, unique bone, unlike any Elias had yet seen among the scattered remains. It was polished smooth, almost reverently held, hinting at its special significance. The creature did not attack. There was no aggression, no territorial snarl. Instead, a series of soft, mournful sounds emanated from its throat, a low, guttural murmur that resonated with the same ancient sorrow Elias had heard echoing through the mine shafts. With slow, deliberate movements, it gestured with its large, calloused hand towards the bones scattered on the floor, then towards the ancient carvings on the cavern walls. Each gesture was weighty with meaning, a silent language born of ages, seemingly attempting to convey a story, a plea, or perhaps a profound warning. Its gaze lingered on Elias, unwavering, as if searching for understanding in his human eyes. Elias, momentarily paralyzed by the sheer enormity of the creature before him, found himself caught between primal terror and an unshakable sense of connection. He looked from the Bigfoot to the bones, then back to the creature's sorrowful eyes. Slowly, painstakingly, a horrifying and beautiful understanding began to dawn upon him. The bones were not prey, not the remnants of a meal, nor were they merely archaeological curiosities. They were ancestors. The mine, this vast, hidden chamber, illuminated by an eerie light, was not just a dwelling or a refuge from the storm. It was a sacred burial ground, a hallowed crypt holding the lineage of this majestic, forgotten species. The rudimentary tools and ornaments, which he had initially dismissed as primitive, were in fact cherished artifacts, remnants of a lost culture, a civilization that existed in the shadows of human history. The Bigfoot was not a monster, nor was it merely a beast of folklore. It was a guardian, a sentinel of memory, watching over its fallen kin, burdened by the weight of a forgotten past. The unique bone clutched in its hand, he now realized, was not just any bone. It was a relic, a key, perhaps passed down through generations, connecting it directly to those ancient inhabitants of the earth. The creature's gestures, its mournful cries, were not threats, but a narrative, a silent testament to a history humanity had meticulously erased or simply failed to perceive. Elias felt a profound shift within him, his scientific quest transforming into something far more spiritual, humbling. He was no longer just an observer. He was a silent witness to a living legend, a keeper of ancient secrets. The sadness in the Bigfoot's eyes was not merely its own. It was the sorrow of a species, hidden and misunderstood, carrying the weight of a monumental untold story. He stood, not in fear, but in reverence, beginning to comprehend the silent saga unfolding before his very eyes. The air hung heavy with unspoken history. As Elias stood transfixed, the giant creature before him, a silent monolith, bathed in the phosphorescent glow. The unique bone clutched in its massive hand felt significant, a key not yet turned. The Bigfoot, sensing Elias's dawning comprehension, now shifted its weight, a movement both deliberate and ancient, and turned, not away from Elias, but towards a deeper, darker recess of the chamber. Its large, intelligent eyes met Elias's for a moment, a silent invitation, a flicker of something close to urgency. Elias, his heart still thrumming with a mixture of awe and trepidation, followed. The creature led him to a section of the chamber wall that, upon closer inspection, appeared to be less natural rock and more a vast, hidden face, carefully sculpted and then meticulously covered over with earth and rubble, only recently cleared away to reveal its true nature. It was as if this particular secret had been purposefully obscured, waiting for a moment of profound revelation. The Bigfoot used its immense strength to subtly shift a final, heavy stone, fully revealing a large, intricately carved stone tablet. The tablet was not smooth, but rugged, bearing the marks of undeniable antiquity, its surface worn by time, yet still breathtaking in its detail. Elias gasped, a sound lost in the vastness of the chamber. The tablet was a mosaic of images and rudimentary symbols, etched with a skill that defied the crude tools he'd seen earlier. It depicted figures undeniably resembling the Bigfoot, their forms majestic and powerful, yet coexisting with figures that were unmistakably human, smaller and less imposing, but present. They weren't fighting. Instead, they were engaged in what appeared to be ancient rituals, shared hunts, and communal gatherings. There were scenes of reverence, of figures looking up at celestial bodies, of hands joined in what could only be interpreted as a form of alliance or cohabitation. It was a visual narrative, a forgotten chapter of history etched in stone, and it spoke of a time when these two vastly different species lived side by side, their lives intricately intertwined. Elias knelt before the tablet, tracing the ancient carvings with trembling fingers. His scientific training, the rigid frameworks of anthropology and evolutionary biology he had always adhered to, fractured and crumbled before this undeniable evidence. This wasn't just a myth, it was history. The Bigfoot wasn't an undiscovered ape or a biological anomaly. It was a distinct, intelligent species, possessing a complex culture and a forgotten history that paralleled, and perhaps even preceded, humanity's earliest ancestors. The revelation hit him with the force of a physical blow. The true origin of the Bigfoot myth wasn't a legend born of misunderstanding, but the faint echoes of a shared past, twisted and obscured by millennia. This was a civilization, perhaps pre-human, perhaps coexisting, that had developed and thrived in ways unimaginable to modern science. The symbols accompanying the images began to reveal their meaning to Elias, his mind racing to connect the visual narrative with the glyphs. He recognized patterns, repetitions, and contextual clues that hinted at language, at a system of communication far more sophisticated than he could have ever imagined for a creature dismissed as folklore. It told a story not just of coexistence, but of a golden age, a time of balance and mutual respect. But then, the tone of the carvings shifted dramatically. The harmonious images gave way to depictions of chaos, fear, and separation. The human figures on the tablet, once depicted as equals, now seemed to shrink, their expressions contorted in terror. The Bigfoot figures, once protectors or companions, now appeared isolated, their faces etched with profound sadness and a new, unsettling wariness. A disturbing truth began to emerge from the stone. The tablet hinted at a catastrophic event, not merely a natural disaster, but something far more malevolent, something that shattered the ancient alliance. It spoke of a betrayal, a profound schism that forced this advanced species, the Bigfoot's ancestors, into the shadows. The symbols that followed this depiction were stark, conveying themes of hiding, of fear, of an absolute necessity to disappear from the human world. It wasn't just a flight for survival from a natural calamity. It was an active, deliberate retreat from humanity, driven by a deep-seated distrust. Elias's eyes widened as he deciphered more of the cryptic narrative. The tablet spoke of early humans, not as the innocent, primitive beings often portrayed, but as having played a role in this catastrophic event. It wasn't a simple misunderstanding, but a moment of profound darkness, an act of aggression or exploitation that forced the Bigfoot species into an existence of secrecy and fear. The dark secret was this: their interaction with early humans had not been one of pure enlightenment or peaceful coexistence. There was a period of great suffering inflicted by humanity upon these creatures, which explained their current reclusiveness, their deep-seated fear, and their distrust of humankind. The mine, then, was not just a burial ground. It was a sanctuary, a tomb for a forgotten history, and a monument to a species that chose oblivion over interaction with a dangerous, unpredictable neighbor. The knowledge laid bare on that ancient stone was a burden, a truth that shifted the bedrock of everything Elias thought he knew about the world, about evolution, and about humanity itself. The very ground beneath him felt less solid, imbued with the weight of a monumental, deeply disturbing secret. The last glyphs on the tablet, heavy with the weight of ancient sorrow, were still burning in Elias's mind when a low rumble shook the very foundations of the cavern. It wasn't the distant, familiar growl of passing thunder, but a deep, resonant vibration that seemed to emanate from the earth itself, directly beneath them. Dust rained down from the ceiling in thick clouds, stinging Elias's eyes and filling the air with the smell of damp earth and decaying rock. A crack, thin at first, snaked its way across the massive stone lintel above the entrance to the chamber, growing wider with terrifying speed. The mine, this ancient sanctuary of forgotten truths, was collapsing. Elias instinctively threw an arm over his head, scrambling backward from the tablet, his heart hammering against his ribs. The world tilted violently as a section of the ceiling, a massive slab of granite, detached with a deafening roar and crashed into the phosphorescent moss-covered floor, sending up a shower of glowing spores. Panic, cold and sharp, threatened to overwhelm him. He could feel the ground trembling under his feet, the air thick with pulverized rock, and the terrifying creak of straining timbers. He was trapped, buried alive in this tomb of secrets. But then, an even greater tremor ripped through the chamber, and this time it was accompanied by a strange, high-pitched whine, like metal grinding against metal, echoing from further within the mine's depths. It was a sound that didn't belong to the natural collapse of rock. The Bigfoot, which had been standing motionless, observing Elias's frantic reading of the tablet, now moved. It didn't flee, didn't cower. Instead, with a guttural roar that seemed to defy the chaos, it lunged forward, not towards an escape route, but directly towards the teetering wall nearest the tablet. Elias watched in stunned disbelief as the creature, with a strength that seemed impossible, braced itself against a massive support pillar that was visibly crumbling. Its muscles bunched and strained, veins bulging under its thick fur as it pushed, not to shore up the collapsing structure, but to divert a cascading stream of smaller rocks that threatened to engulf the tablet. A large, jagged boulder broke free from above, plummeting directly towards Elias. Before he could even react, the Bigfoot, with astonishing speed, swatted it aside with an open hand, sending it crashing into a far wall, demonstrating a protective instinct that defied any logical explanation for a creature previously seen as a territorial guardian. It wasn't just shielding him. It was actively working to preserve the site, to protect the very object that held its ancestors' story. The immense strength it displayed was not just raw power, but applied with precision and an understanding of structural integrity that astounded Elias. It wasn't merely reacting, it was executing a strategy. He saw the Bigfoot glance at the additional bone it had carried, the one Elias had dismissed as a mere relic. With a sudden, powerful movement, the creature slammed the thick, curved bone into a specific recess on the tablet. A perfect, intricate fit. As the bone clicked into place, a ripple of shimmering blue light pulsed across the ancient stone. The light wasn't electric or chemical. It was organic, almost alive, emanating from within the tablet's very substance. The carvings, previously muted, now glowed with an intensified luminescence, and a section of the tablet, one that had appeared blank, began to illuminate. Symbols, previously unseen, pulsed into existence, intertwining to form a complex, dynamic pattern. This was no mere decorative piece. This was an active mechanism, a key. And what it unlocked was a hidden message, a grave warning. The glowing symbols flowed and reformed, coalescing into a visual narrative accompanied by a series of low, resonant tones that seemed to vibrate in Elias's very bones. The previous narrative had depicted a past catastrophe, a betrayal. This new, activated message was not historical. It was prophetic. It showed images of a world consumed by fire, of shadows spreading across the land, of humanity, not as oppressors, but as victims caught in a renewed cycle of destruction. It warned of a returning danger, the very same malevolent force that had driven the Bigfoot's ancestors into hiding, that had shattered their golden age. This wasn't merely a recounting of an old wound. It was an urgent plea, a desperate foretelling of a future catastrophe. The message depicted the ancient entities, the ones responsible for the initial cataclysm, stirring once more, their dark influence creeping back into the world. It showed humanity, blind and unsuspecting, on the brink of repeating the mistakes of their distant ancestors, of succumbing to the same seductive but ultimately destructive powers. The Bigfoot's profound sadness, the centuries of reclusiveness, the distrust. It wasn't just about their own suffering. It was about the burden of a shared prophecy, a knowledge of an impending doom that they had desperately tried to warn against in the past, only to be met with violence and misunderstanding. Their disappearance wasn't just a retreat. It was a desperate attempt to sever ties, to protect themselves, and perhaps, inadvertently, humanity, from a danger they knew firsthand. The glowing message intensified, bathing the collapsing chamber in an ethereal, pulsing blue light, highlighting the grim fate it foretold. Elias felt a sudden, terrifying clarity. The mine wasn't just a burial ground. It was a vault of knowledge, a time capsule left by a species that had already faced and survived the very threat now resurfacing. The additional bone wasn't just a key. It was a catalyst for this final, desperate warning. The Bigfoot's commitment to preserving the tablet wasn't about pride or history. It was about ensuring this ultimate message, this final warning, reached someone, anyone, who might still listen before it was too late. The cycle of destruction was about to repeat, and this time, there might be no escape for anyone. The earth groaned, a deep, resonant rumble that tore through the ancient caverns of the mine. Dust rained down, thick and choking, as the massive stone tablet shuddered violently. Elias, still reeling from the devastating truths unveiled by the ancient carvings, saw the ceiling above begin to crack, fissures spreading like spiderweb across the rock face. The collapse was imminent, a horrifying crescendo to this incredible discovery. The Bigfoot, with an almost impossible agility for its size, surged forward, its immense hands pressing against a particularly large boulder that had dislodged, preventing its immediate descent. Its eyes, moments ago filled with sorrow and a desperate longing for understanding, now burned with fierce determination. Elias realized then, with a jolt that went to his core, that the creature was not merely trying to save itself, but to protect the tablet, and by extension, the history it held. He scrambled, adrenaline coursing through his veins, to where the smaller, key-like bone rested within its recess on the tablet. The Bigfoot grunted, a sound of exertion and urgency, as it strained against the falling debris. Elias grasped the bone, pulling it free just as another section of the ceiling gave way with a deafening crash. He clutched the bone tightly, a tangible piece of this profound revelation, as the Bigfoot, seeing him secure it, gave another powerful heave, buying them precious seconds. It then turned, a silent command in its gaze, and gestured towards a narrow, almost invisible crevice at the far end of the chamber, a path Elias had not noticed before. This was their escape, a desperate lifeline in the face of absolute obliteration. They moved, with surprising speed, Elias following the Bigfoot through the winding, constricted passage. The air grew thin, laden with the smell of damp earth and ancient minerals. Behind them, the sounds of the mine's final collapse echoed, a thunderous roar that sealed off the sacred chamber forever. Elias felt a pang of despair for the lost knowledge, the untouched history now buried beneath tons of rock. But then he looked at the bone in his hand, and at the retreating back of his silent guide, and understood. Some secrets were meant to remain hidden, protected by the earth itself, only their essence to be carried forward. The journey back to the surface was a blur of scrambling over rocks, pushing through tangled undergrowth, and a profound sense of unreality. The Bigfoot led the way with an unerring sense of direction, navigating the dense forest with silent ease, its massive form disappearing and reappearing through the trees. Finally, they emerged near the familiar path leading to Elias's cabin, the soft glow of twilight painting the sky. The air felt crisp and clean, a stark contrast to the dust and claustrophobia of the mine. The Bigfoot stopped at the edge of the clearing, turning to face Elias for a final time. Its gaze was piercing, a weight of expectation and warning in its depths. It then extended a surprisingly gentle hand, not reaching for Elias, but pointing towards the bone he still held. A guttural rumble, soft but insistent, left its chest. Elias understood. The mission of warning humanity, a burden shouldered by this ancient species for millennia, was now passed to him. With a final, lingering look, the creature turned and dissolved into the deepening shadows of the forest, becoming one with the wilderness once more. Elias stumbled back to his cabin a changed man. The man who had entered the mine, driven by a desperate intellectual curiosity, was gone. In his place stood someone profoundly altered, burdened by a truth that transcended his wildest cryptozoological fantasies. His obsession with simply finding Bigfoot had been replaced by a crushing responsibility to understand, to interpret, and somehow to share the truth of what he had witnessed. The disturbing revelation was not merely the existence of Bigfoot, but the shattering implication of their history, a forgotten past where humanity played a role in their tragic retreat, and the looming future threat that had been etched into the final activating message on the tablet. He was no longer just Elias, the reclusive photographer. He was now a reluctant messenger, a keeper of an ancient secret, tasked with conveying a warning that the world might not be ready to hear. The piece of the tablet, the key-like bone he carried, felt impossibly heavy in his hand, a tangible fragment of a shattered past and a precarious future. How could he possibly convince anyone of such an extraordinary, unbelievable story? The scientific community would scoff, the public would dismiss it as delusion. Yet, the weight of the Bigfoot's trusting gaze, their millennia-long silence, demanded that he try. He knew his life would never be the same. The quiet solitude of his cabin now felt less like a sanctuary, and more like a launching pad for an impossible mission. The woods around him, once a source of comfort and mystery, now held the echoes of a deep, ancient sorrow and a prescient warning. He had sought the unknown, and the unknown had revealed itself, not as a simple creature, but as the guardian of a truth that redefined human history and shadowed its future. His journey had truly just begun. He had to decide now how to carry this impossible truth into a world that was blind to the very foundations of its own existence.